right now is currently, you're currently on display in several places in New York. Are you also at Gallery Sitka East right now? Or is it only that you've been in Gallery Sitka?
Oh, I'm an ongoing member of Gallery Sitka East, happily. Glimmer is over. I think the show that I was just in is no longer. Is it still up? No, it's still up. Okay. So I have a number of pieces in a show that was curated by a fellow artist who's a member of Gallery Sitka. I'm always with Gallery Sitka in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Try to keep.
Yeah, Beth is with us right now. We've got a show going on till the end of the year. It's called Glimmer. And Beth was in the show. We did an interview with her a week ago, which is, I have the video if anybody wants to see it. And she also has quite a number of pieces in our space, which is in Shirley, Mass. So anybody can drop by there and see them in person. And then, of course, we have them on our website as well. So at least in Massachusetts, that's one place you can see them.
Right. You also have your artist on Artsy too. Yeah.
Yes. Which is something we are trying new this year because of COVID. We wanted another way to get the art out there versus just having it here in Massachusetts and on our website. So Artsy is a platform for collectors, and it's national, international, really. So, and Beth's up there.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Right. So I've got some. I'm in a couple of galleries. Mostly virtual shows right now, but I've got some stuff happening in the spring. But I'll just tell you a little bit about what I'm going to show you now, so you have a context for it. When COVID started, I was really immobilized. I was no longer in New York. I was on Long Island and kind of moved out there for a period of time. And for about a month, I was up at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, frantically cooking and compulsively worrying about what I had in my freezer. Was I going to have enough food? I was very, very anxious, and I did not go into my studio at all. It was a month. And then I woke up one morning and I contacted a very close friend of mine who's also a painter. And she and I had painted together in college. And on other occasions in the years past, we've done a lot of work together. So I decided I'd FaceTime her and see if we could work together. And we have been doing that since April. In the beginning, we were FaceTiming every day. And then it became less often. And now it's twice a week. So it's been really, really helpful. We can critique each other's work. And I can see the progression of her work. She can see the progression of my work. So that was really, really important to do. I was really, if we hadn't done that, I don't know how I would have started again. And for me, that connection with another person, I think was really, really important. So, with that said, I'm going to show you, these are in the sequence of how they were done. And I'll tell you a little bit about them as we go through them.
Awesome.
This is called my Corona Collage. And this is not indicative of the kind of work I do. I have literal reference points here. You see a little heart there, which would normally not be anything I would work with, any literal images like that. But I think my heart was kind of literally breaking at that time. So and I don't do much collage work. I did a lot a long time ago, but the colors also are more vivid. These oranges and reds are more, I think, a piece of the COVID. Every time you saw COVID represented, it was always this red thing. Right. I think it's still represented in that way. So that was the first thing that we did together. Some of these papers are from the 1970s. These are color aid papers, which are papers that are very beautifully silk screened. So I was using a lot of old materials to do that. The second painting was also a COVID-related painting. It's called Getting Through. This, to me, symbolizes the virus kind of moving through the clouds. There, the reds and moving through the gray and the blues of the sky. So that was the second painting that I did that still really had that feeling, the feeling of COVID. The style of the painting is more similar to the work that I do now. But again, the colors are more from what I was experiencing. Right. Not to say that I'm not working from what I'm experiencing generally, but this was really overt and very literal.
Right.
This was also, I was in a show in Greece at the Koupavoulis Museum. They asked 35 American artists to paint something. In that, we all got the same size canvases. They were all 12 by 12. They shipped them in these beautiful boxes, and then we had to create something. It happened that I was creating that at exactly the time that COVID was hitting. So this, again, is very strongly influenced by COVID. thus the kind of the title Turbulence. It's the, you know, the brush strokes are kind of more expressive, and it's something, again, moving through something. So this is another, you know, COVID kind of inspired painting.
There's a lot of rhythm in your work.
Rhythm and movement. Yes, they're really, really important. Now this is more moving into the work that I am more comfortable with. I'm really excited by the skeletal nature of landscape as it decays, or when there's a natural disaster. There's something that I really like about the feeling of that. It's kind of eerie, and I like the skeletal nature of it. So this is the beginning, spring in the Springs. Where I live on Long Island is called the Springs. So this is kind of the beginning of moving back into work I'm more comfortable with. The expressive nature. This would be more like a brainscape, Cameron. This is more something that comes from my brain. While it may have a literal reference point for someone to look at it, you can see, that's a tree, or that's a branch, but that is not from a literal place.
I get you. So this is actually, not to interrupt you here, Beth, but this is actually, when I was looking at your stuff on your website, this is one of the ones that stood out to me for whatever reason it was. But I remember looking at this, I'm glad it was brought up, because I was hoping to bring it up at some point over our conversation. But it just, something about it spoke to me. I instantly thought of the California wildfires and Australian wildfires from earlier this year. And it just, something about this painting and the way the colors all worked, like you were saying, just the skeletal nature of the branches itself just hit me right there and then. So I'm glad we were able to, this one was brought up and we were able to look at it.
I'm glad that was your response without me having to talk about it. That's how you felt when you saw it. That's exciting to me, because that's really what it is. It's kind of like the rebirth after desiccation, or after some kind of decay, or some natural disaster. Because things always come back, and I do love that about nature.
Right. It always has the ability to bounce back.
It comes back. It may come back in an aborted form, or in some convoluted way, but it comes back. There's something that always comes back, and I think that's really cool. This is more kind of more of my typical paintings. You were talking earlier about, or you mentioned, you have a white canvas. What do you do with that? How do you start a painting? I often put a whole color on a canvas before I start. So this kind of terracotta kind of color was something I did on the canvas before I did anything else. And this, to me, is really this is near a beach near where I live. And this, to me, is a really good example of the feeling of landscape, of the movement, of the light, of the beach. Again, a brainscape, not a literal reference point, but something that I think people, if you're open to feeling when you look at a painting, you can experience something like this. People who are not open to abstract work won't really respond to these kinds of paintings, because they need literal reference points. So that's really challenging, but that's okay if they don't respond.
You primarily or almost exclusively work in acrylic, correct?
Yeah. People
why is that?
It's easy for me. It dries. I love that you can just wipe it away. And I really like that it dries fast. And I find it really challenging to create complex colors. People have a lot of bias. Acrylic paints, they're plasticky. They don't really have a lot of body. And I kind of really don't agree. And I love working with them. And I think because they're not toxic at all, too. I mean, there's certain colors that aren't great, but mostly I don't have to worry about any of that. And I can paint outside and not worry about how I'm going to bring the canvases back, because by the time I'm done, the paintings are dry. And I like that. A lot of people don't, but I like the immediacy of that.
There's definitely some practical qualities to using acrylic, especially if you're going to be on site.
Yeah.
There's just also a lot of unforgiving nature of oils. There's another added, not that it can't be fun in its own right, but it's a lot more unforgiving to use that medium in a lot of respects. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff you can avoid with acrylic.
Yeah.
Now, what I also found interesting too, in looking at on the body of your work on your website is, and this is hard all the time to get in photography, of course, and not being 4 inches away from your work on the wall. But it seems like there's a lot of textural things going on in a number of your paintings.
Yes.
You typically don't see that in acrylic. You typically see that a lot more with oils, you know, where people can really get a lot more body from the art. I'm just kind of interested, you know, from a technical standpoint, how you're actually achieving that.
Well, I use a lot of gel, a lot of mediums. There's a company called Golden Paints, and they're still a family-owned business in upstate New York, and they make tons of different mediums, all kinds of gel mediums and sand and pumice mediums and glaze mediums. So you can always get more textural stuff by adding mediums to the paint. So I use a lot of that. And I paint in a lot of layers too. So the thicker the thicker the layers, the more the texture.
You're going to get some of that interesting textural stuff.
Yeah. And this was just in a show. The AARP sponsored a show with the Islip Art Museum on Long Island. So everyone had to be, I think, 50 and over. And it was a really interesting show where we had 30 seconds to speak about the painting. And it was called New Beginnings. It was a COVID-related show that they had 100 artists for. So that was in that show. That was a really cool kind of experience. There's been a lot of things that have come about in COVID for artists that have been interesting. So this is Burnt Orange. It's a small painting. One of the things that happened in COVID for me is I paint much larger, and I ended up painting really small paintings because that's all I had. Whatever I had in my studio was what I ended up using. So I'm now painting larger again, which I'm much more comfortable with. I think this painting would be much more successful if it was really big, because there's so much going on in there. I think it's okay, but I think it would be really exciting if it were larger, more gestural, because you can get that stuff in smaller paintings, but not really the gesture of a larger movement.
And well, this painting too, you're almost on this like celestial plane, and you're caught between two. You see what I'm saying? Because
you're talking about this
from the foreground,
right.
And which is exciting enough, 20 by 16 or on this little slide, but you can imagine this surrounding you if it were several feet across, you know, on a wall in front of you, you know?
Right. Yeah, the energy would be really exciting. The other thing I'm really interested in is line, because line is really exciting. And line is, you can create so much, you know, the differences in lines here is something that I'm always very, very interested in. Creating line, broader line, narrower line, using line not to define edges of shape, but to create the shape itself. So I love having that. I like to always have, not obstacles, but I like to have goals that I set in mind when I'm in my exploration of painting. So there's the line here. And you can create a painted line is much more interesting to me than a drawn line, because a drawn line has one dimension. So with a painted line, you can really just get so much going on here, like the depth there, and so that's exciting.
Right.
So as a creation, as a step-by-step, when this painting was being created, because I think this is interesting for people who don't paint, okay? And we so rarely get to ask artists. And because you're using acrylic, so what first appeared on this canvas was line, primarily what we see here as, I don't know if that's maroon or some kind of reddish ochre type of color, correct?
You're talking about this line or this color?
Yeah, all of that, particularly though, the lines, because almost pound for pound, all of the line elements in this painting are that color. So I'm assuming that sort of appeared first is what you're getting at in the creation process, or no?
I don't think it did. I think usually I often, the initial movement is a line. I do begin with a line, but I move quickly into creating large areas of shapes that can be, it interposes all the time. There's never, because I'm using different materials at the same time and different colors at the same time. So I can't really tell you what I started with here. I don't really remember, but I know I usually start with a line. Mm-hmm. But with abstract work, I mean, it's so important that there's the composition works spatially. So large areas of color have to really work with line. So I'm not really sure how, I can't really remember what I did in the sequence of this.
Cool. Do you try to be less, when you're working, is the goal to not be so predictable, or to be too attached to some kind of form expectation, or do you not worry about that, or is it kind of the opposite?
Well, it's both, because if you just kind of go blah, then that's really not a painting. You know, it's just
Right.
like blah. So while the creative piece of what the creative process is, I think, not necessarily a conscious process and something that's very intuitive, you have to be able to look back and look at the painting and say, okay, well, this works, this doesn't work, the composition works here, this is too much blue, there's too much white here, the spaces, these shapes are abutting each other, I need to create more of a space where there's a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. So there's always for me anyway, there has to be an intellectual process of really examining the painting as I'm also involved in the less conscious part of it.
Right.
Because otherwise you have something that becomes more like an undifferentiated mass, and then that's not really a painting. I mean, I guess
it's kind of a justification of why this is here and why it's so, right, different elements. That, you have to be able to at least look back, if not have known in the first place, this is the consciousness I'm bringing to this effort, as opposed to what you're saying, like it's all just an accident,
Right.
Yeah, I'm not look, I think when I was much younger, it was like, oh, happy accidents, isn't this great? But I really feel very strongly that the work has to have some substance in a conventional way of how art is understood.
Right.
Even as an abstract painter, I want to understand space. I want the space to work in a certain way, and that those are conventional norms of creating space, because you use this color next to that color, that makes space. You have to know, I think it's really important to know about the way color works, the way space works, to feel like you're making complete paintings.
Yeah.
Right.
This is swoosh. I rework paintings a lot. The thing I think that's most important for me as an artist, and probably as a person and as a psychotherapist, is authenticity. I feel like that's really, really very important. I feel like my work is very authentic. And as a therapist, I feel like my work is authentic. I just come from a very real place, and as a human being. I don't mean that in a trite way. I mean that just like that's very important for me. And I think my work is very real, from an emotional place, from an authentic place. This is a more recent painting where, my earlier paintings from a longer time ago were more organic body shape, more like body shapes. And I think this has more, that's why I called it torso, has more of a feeling of a body and less of a feeling of a landscape. And I'm trying to push myself more to use square canvases so that I'm moving away from landscape and having my work become more integrated in an abstract sensibility.
I get you. Okay. When you name your paintings, is that usually the process of you get it done, you get it all onto your canvas there, and then it kind of just comes to you from there? Or is there times where you have an idea of what you want to call it beforehand and then paint from there? Or
well, I mean, if I'm painting something from a real place, then it's, it has a name of sorts. Yeah, the names really come about after the painting is done.
After. Makes sense. Okay.
What appears, and then I often ask my husband, although he's not a visual person at all, I'll find someone else who I can ask who may have more of an ease with that.
Right.
Now, these are very interesting. These last two projects, there was a U.S. Postal Service project that was started in April by a woman in New York. It's really a big project now, where what we did was you found another artist, and through the mail, you started a painting, and then this is actually a collage on paper. And then I started it and sent it to a friend, and she finished it. And she sent me a painting, and then I finished it. And we sent it all through the post office. It was a way of helping the post office because they were in such terrible shape. It was a way to keep the post office kind of going, and a way for people to feel connected with each other. And this has been this piece of work has been in New York, it's been in Colorado, it's been in Texas. So these are shows that are all over the country, USPS Art Projects, and they're really cool. So, awesome. And this is another one of those. that I also did during this time. So for me, being able to connect with other people, initially with my friend in FaceTime to start working again, and with these USPS projects, what I really found out from all of this was how important it was for me, even as an artist, in my isolated way, to connect with other people.